The BBC banned their music, so they built a pirate empire. How Shabba Ranks and Cocoa Tea turned radio into a weapon will leave you speechless. Government raids couldn't stop them. Jail threats couldn't silence them. This is the secret revolution that changed music forever. Watch till the end. You'll never hear Pirates' anthem the same way again. Cocoa Tea, born Calvin George Scott, had already proven that he was more than just a singer. He was a prophet draped in melodies, delivering his sermons through speakers crackling with bass. Raised in the quiet resilience of Rocky Point, Clarendon, Cocoa Tea knew what it meant to live without a voice. His early life was marked by silence and struggle, and that silence was broken only when he began to sing. By the time he returned from his stint as a fisherman and jockey, he had honed a voice that carried the weight of generations. The stage didn't just give him fame. It gave him a platform to fight for those who had none. Shabba Ranks, meanwhile, had become a storm on stage. Born Rexton Ralston Fernando Gordon, he embodied the chaos and charisma of Seaview Gardens in Kingston. From the first moment, he gripped a microphone under the mentorship of Josie Wales. It was clear he was a fire that would not be contained. The name Co-Pilot was shed like old skin, and Shabba Ranks was born, bold, unapologetic, and fiercely Jamaican. His gravelly voice, syncopated flow, and electrifying presence weren't just entertainment. They were a cultural declaration. He was not just performing. He was proclaiming a new era. That new era collided with old laws. In Britain, pirate radio was a cultural lifeline for the Jamaican diaspora, the Windrush children who had inherited both their parents' music and their marginalization. Legal stations refused to play their rhythms, ignored their language, and dismissed their existence. So they built their own towers. From rooftops and tower blocks, antennas reached toward the sky, transmitting sound and defiance. Pirate radio became more than rebellion, it became refuge. But refuge, to the state, was rebellion. The Department of Trade and Industry unleashed waves of raids, confiscating equipment, arresting DJs, smashing the symbols of sonic freedom. They didn't understand that these were not just illegal broadcasts, they were lifelines to a forgotten people. In the face of this onslaught, Cocoa Tea did not stay silent. He collaborated with Shabba Ranks and the mysterious Home Tea to create what would become the rallying cry of the movement, Pirates' Anthem. The track was more than a song. It was a manifesto. Dem call us pirates, just because we play what the people want. With that line, Cocoa Tea transformed criminalization into pride. The anthem celebrated the unlicensed voices, the brave broadcasters who risked prison to keep the culture alive. Shabba Ranks, ever the militant poet, thundered his declaration. If they shut down one station, 5 more would rise. It wasn't hyperbole. It was prophecy. Their voices traveled beyond the studio. In the alleys of Hackney and the corners of Brixton, their music became ammunition. Pirate stations like Choice FM, Power Jam, and Genesis Radio played Pirates' Anthem like scripture. The DTI could seize equipment, but they couldn't silence a song that had already embedded itself into the bloodstream of the city. In a time when black voices were muted, these frequencies became the soundtrack of defiance. New York, too, felt the shockwave. Caribbean communities in Brooklyn tuned in nightly to illegal stations broadcasting out of basements and bodegas. The DJs, speaking in patois and spinning dancehall, brought home to those who had been displaced. It wasn't just music, it was memory, wrapped in melody and rebellion. When the Coast Guard stormed the freighter off Long Island in 1987, they weren't just raiding a pirate operation, they were attacking a symbol of cultural resistance. Cocoa Tea knew what was at stake. He had seen his own people marginalized, watched as their art was pushed into the shadows. Yet he refused to let that be their fate. He didn't just sing about pirates, he became one. He lent his voice to the cause, even when it meant putting himself at risk. His music gave the movement credibility, legitimacy, and above all, hope. When Shabba Ranks toured England, he didn't stay silent either. At interviews, on stage, in casual conversation, he spoke of the radio struggle like it was a war, because to him, it was. It wasn't just about airplay. It was about identity. If you could not hear your story on the airwaves, then who were you? If your sound was illegal, then so was your existence. Shabba refused that logic. Every time he shouted "Dancehall can't stall," it wasn't just a chant, it was a challenge. The British government didn't know how to handle the resistance. The more they cracked down, the more pirate stations multiplied. Each antenna taken down led to 5 more springing up. They had underestimated the passion that pulsed beneath the surface. By 1990, some stations had been on air for nearly a decade, uninterrupted by raids or repression. One of them, Kiss FM, eventually gained legal status, and the first song they played when they went legit? Pirates Anthem. It was a victory that proved what Shabba Ranks and Cocoa Tea had always known. You could silence a transmitter, but not a message. You could arrest a DJ, but not a community. The legacy of that moment lives on in every legal Caribbean radio station today, from IRE FM in Jamaica to Hot 97 in New York. These platforms exist because once, 2 men dared to call themselves pirates. But the story did not end with a song or a license. In 2025, the world was shaken by the passing of Cocoa Tea. Calvin George Scott died in Florida of cardiac arrest, leaving behind a musical revolution and a gaping silence. His death felt like the lowering of a flag, the end of an era. But even in grief, the movement remembered its roots. In Clarendon, where his journey began, his Thanksgiving service rang with chants and sorrow. The Naya Bingy rhythm of Holy Mount Zion echoed through the hills as his community sang him home. On that day, his brother Burley sang. So did Richie Stevens, Little John, Bongo Herman. Shabba Ranks himself stood among them, not as a star, but as a brother. Josie Wales, Charlie Chaplin, Wayne Wonder, all came to pay tribute. It wasn't just a funeral. It was a reunion of voices that had once defied silence. As they sang, the ghosts of pirate radios filled the air. Shabba Ranks, now older and weathered by time, continues to carry the fire. His performances are less frequent, but his voice still holds the same urgency. He speaks of the old days with reverence, knowing that he and Cocoa Tea did something that few artists ever do. They didn't just make hits, they made history. They didn't just move crowds, they moved the dial of justice. The story of pirate radio is a story of immigrants, of resistance, of sonic rebellion. It is the story of antennas built with hope and playlists curated with love. And at the heart of it were 2 men, linked not just by music, but by mission. Cocoa Tea and Shabba Ranks fought not just to preserve pirate radios, but to preserve the right to be heard. Even now, in 2025, pirate stations still exist. Some are online, some operate from remote corners of cities, some flicker in and out of existence like ghost signals. But every time they play Pirates Anthem, they reconnect with a legacy forged in struggle. They remind the world that once, music wasn't just sound, it was resistance. When the static crackle of an unlicensed frequency breaks through the air in some quiet corner of South London or deep in the Brooklyn boroughs, that defiant noise carries the spirit of Shabba Ranks and Cocoa Tea. Their story is not confined to the timeline of releases or the lifespan of an album. It is embedded in the rebellious nature of sound itself. Long after the wires have been cut and the police have cleared the rooftops, the memory of their resistance still plays in the background like a rhythm too potent to suppress. What made their stance legendary wasn't just the music, it was the timing. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, Jamaica was in political turmoil, and so were many of the communities in its diaspora. Young Black Britons were struggling under Thatcher-era hostility. Black neighborhoods in London were marginalized, surveilled, and silenced. The mainstream media refused to reflect their lived realities. The BBC wouldn't play their music. Legal radio operated like an exclusion zone. To get on air as a Caribbean artist, you either had to cross over or be ignored. But Shabba Ranks didn't cross over. He kicked in the door. His style, heavy with patois and uncompromising in cultural pride, refused to be diluted. So did Cocoa Tea. They weren't trying to appeal to the mainstream. They were trying to create one for people like them. They understood that these pirate stations were not illegal because of what they played, but because of whom they represented. That realization turned music into a weapon. They used it to cut through bureaucracy, prejudice, and censorship. It wasn't just England and the US that felt the tremors. Across Europe and in the Caribbean itself, pirate radio took on symbolic weight. In places like Toronto, where Caribbean immigrants built tight-knit communities despite winter and racial bias, unlicensed frequencies became sacred ground. These stations carried sermons, dance hall marathons, midnight call-ins, and protest announcements. The music of Cocoa Tea and Shabba Ranks was not background noise. It was the main event. When they played Pirates Anthem, every Caribbean voice that had been flattened by assimilation stood up. Shabba Ranks, with his audacity, didn't just energize audiences, he embarrassed institutions. In one famous on-air exchange in 1992, a BBC radio host asked if dancehall could ever be accepted into proper British music culture. Shabba looked him dead in the eye and replied, "You cannot accept what already run things." That kind of self-assurance was a threat to gatekeepers, but it was a gospel to fans. He didn't seek permission, he declared sovereignty. The relationship between reggae, dancehall, and radio goes deeper than airplay. It is spiritual. It is ritual. In Jamaican culture, the sound system isn't just about entertainment. It's about community order. DJs are more than selectors. They're mediators, storytellers, watchdogs. When that role was imported into the concrete corridors of British council flats, it took the form of pirate radio. These DJs weren't just spinning tracks. They were offering therapy, validation, and news. They were the griots of the modern diaspora. That's what Cocoa Tea understood so well. His voice wasn't crafted for mere melody. It carried messages, beliefs, even warnings. Songs like Tune In and Rikers Island were steeped in social commentary. When he sang about police violence or the struggles of youth, it wasn't abstraction, it was reality. That same commitment to truth made him a natural warrior for the airwaves. In the quiet rooms where station managers worried about being raided, his voice was a source of courage. In the late-night broadcasts when DJs risked arrest, his music gave them purpose. There was a time in 1989 when the authorities clamped down so hard in parts of London that even hardened broadcasters hesitated. One operator, known as Sir Jaw Mike, recalled being fined 3 times in 1 month and having 2 transmitters confiscated. But in that same month, after hearing Cocoa Tea's Pirates Anthem played back-to-back on a scratchy signal from Lewisham, he went out and bought another transmitter. The lyrics, "If dem break one down, we build 5 more strong," weren't hyperbole. They were instruction. Shabba Ranks and Cocoa Tea had become, perhaps unknowingly, architects of guerrilla communication. Their music gave pirate radio something no amount of technical savvy could: soul. In 1993, when the government pushed for the radio authority to fast-track licenses for certain community stations, it was largely a reaction to the overwhelming popularity of the underground networks, many of which had made their names spinning the likes of Shabba's Trailer Load of Girls or Cocoa Tea's 18 and Over. But there was always a cost. The raids were brutal. Transmitters were smashed, fines issued, DJs arrested. One station in Birmingham lost 3 members to immigration raids triggered by station surveillance. Another in Bristol was forcibly dismantled during a live call-in show. And yet, Pirates Anthem would resurface like a ghost, played through a new antenna, by a new rebel, with the same sense of mission. By 2005, pirate radio had moved partially online, finding a safer harbor in internet streaming. But the spirit remained unchanged. Cocoa Tea had begun mentoring younger artists and was working on projects that blended roots reggae with new technology. He spoke openly about the need to protect musical heritage in an era of algorithms. Shabba Ranks became more selective with his public appearances, but remained a titan in Jamaican culture, his name invoked whenever the roots of dancehall were discussed. Their legacies continued to shape the next generation. Artists like Chronix, Protoge, and Kabaka Pyramid grew up in the shadow of this resistance. They may not have stood on rooftops with antennas, but they inherited the defiance. The idea that black voices must fight to be heard had not gone away. It had only changed form. When Cocoa Tea died in 2025, the grief was global. Tributes poured in not just from musicians, but from former pirate station operators, underground DJs, and community activists. One tribute on a now-legal station in Bristol summed it up best. "Without Cocoa Tea, I wouldn't be on air. He didn't just make songs. He made us brave." His funeral wasn't quiet. It was thunderous. The drums of the Naya Bingy pounded like the beat of resistance. The crowd sang, not mournfully, but triumphantly. Shabba Ranks stood among them, silent for much of the service, until a microphone was placed in his hand. He didn't perform. He simply said, "He gave me a voice when no one would give me a mic. That's my brother." It was a eulogy and a confession all at once. And now, Decades after they first raised their voices against silence, the story of Shabba Ranks and Cocoa Tea lives on. Not in headlines, not in charts, but in the quiet revolution of communities who still build their own towers, still send their own signals, still refuse to be unheard. Pirate radio never died, it evolved. And in every beat of that evolution, their names echo. They were more than artists. They were frequencies of freedom. After everything you've just heard, do you believe Cocoa Tea and Shabba Ranks truly changed radio forever? Should pirate radio be remembered as criminal defiance or cultural necessity? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This is your story too. And if stories like this stir something in you, if you believe music is more than just entertainment, subscribe now. There's more truth coming through the static.